video is brought to you by Envato Elements, and they gave me a full free year to give away to one of you, which I will be announcing at the end of this video. So make sure you stick around to find out if you won. Today, using Apple Motion, we're going to create a Colin and Samir title card template for Final Cut Pro. Also, if you're a patron, you'll be able to download this project right now. First things first, go ahead and open up Apple Motion. We're going to select the Final Cut title so that we can reuse this later on in Final Cut Pro. I'm going to leave it at 1080p, and Colin and Samir like to work at 24 frames per second, so that is what we're going to do. I'll go ahead and leave my duration at 10 seconds and push open. Now, I've actually downloaded the video that I'm trying to replicate, so I'm going to import that as a reference. So I'll push Command I, and we'll go ahead and locate the footage I am importing. Now, this footage has audio, so I'm going to go ahead and just disable the audio right here so we don't have to listen to it over and over again. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the title background and the type text here. Then I'm going to rename the group that has our reference video as reference. Then we can go ahead and collapse that. From there, we'll create a new group, and this is where we're going to create all of our graphics inside of. So I'm just going to call that graphics, and we're going to create one more group that has our background. Let's go ahead and push Command left bracket to drop that down in the layer stack, and we'll also do the same with the graphics. With our background group selected, we'll go into our generators and locate the color solid. I'll just drag that directly into the background. Then we'll go to the inspector and find the color options here. We'll go ahead and just set that to white. We can go ahead and lock down the background if we so desire. From there, we can go into our graphics. If we play through Colin and Samir's video, we can actually see how wide the graphic is here. So it says, "Be a purple cow." Now, if you don't get the "Be a purple cow" reference, I highly recommend that you go check out their video. I'll have a link to it down in the description. So there are a couple options for creating this yellow box. I'm actually going to use one that I'm just trying out. I don't know if it's the best method, but it's one that I really like. We're going to use the pen tool rather than creating a rectangle. And I'm going to select this left side, and then we'll hold shift and then select the right side, just like so. So we have a nice straight line, then we'll push enter. From there, I can go ahead and select our reference. We'll go to the properties and we'll set the opacity to 50% just so we can see what's happening underneath it. In our Bezier group, we'll go back to the shape settings. We're going to find the start cap and set that to none. And we'll also find the end cap and set that to none. Now, I happen to know that 240 is about the number we are going for, so I'm just going to set that exactly like so. After that, we can go into the brush color type, and I have already used the eyedropper on the reference footage to get this yellow color. So I'm just going to select the yellow color from my colors here. If you didn't know, you can actually just click and drag colors directly over into this color selector here. And so now we have the nice Colin and Samir yellow. So let's go ahead and animate this yellow box. I'm going to hide our reference for now. And we are going to locate the last point offset. You'll see that as I click and drag that, it's animating this bar. So this is why I like to use the pen tool rather than using a rectangle, because if I used a rectangle, I would have to go in, change the anchor point to this left-hand side. It would just be a lot more steps. So that is why we're using the pen tool for this. I find it a little bit easier for what we're trying to do. With our last point offset, we're going to go to the very beginning and set that to 0. We'll click to add a keyframe. Then we're going to move forward in 2 seconds here, and we'll set that to a full 100. So as it is, we have this basic right on animation, but we definitely want to add some dynamics to make it look smooth and fluid. So what we're going to do is go over here to the right side and click on these 3 diamonds. That's going to give us the keyframe editor. I do have an entire video on the keyframe editor if you want to check that out above. I don't remember which side it's on. In here, we can see we have this nice straight line indicating the animation we've just created. We are just going to select this animation keyframe, right click, go to interpolation and set it to Bezier. Now you'll see that we have this little handle here. If I click and drag that handle out, we can adjust how our animation looks. So what I want is this animation to shoot out really fast and then slope off at the end. We can also select this other animation keyframe and straighten that out just a little bit. So if I play it through, we'll see how the animation looks. Looking pretty nice. It might be a little bit too severe for my taste, so we'll go ahead and adjust these keyframes until we get it to a place where I'm happy. Nice, I really like how that looks. We can go ahead and just call this title box. Now let's go ahead and add in our text objects. So I'm going to select the text tool down here. We'll go ahead and click to create a text, and we're just going to write purple cow. Then in the appearance settings, I want to set that to black. After that, we can go back to the format settings and drag it up until it's to a good size. I think I ended up going to about 195 in the final product. We'll go ahead and select our arrow tool. And I also recommend that you set the alignment to centered. Then we can click and drag this purple cow text to the very middle of our project. Let's go ahead and animate this text coming in. With our purple cow text selected, we'll go up to behaviors, go down to text animation and select sequence text. Over here on the left side, we have a bunch of options, and here at the top is the parameter. If we want to affect a certain parameter, such as position or opacity, we can click on this add button. From there, we can go down to format and select position. Now you'll see that we can affect the X and Y position on our text. And if we click this down arrow, we can also affect the Z position. What I'm going to do is just click and drag on the Y parameter, and we can actually go back to the very beginning to get a good idea of how far down this text is. We'll set it down to something like -75. You see this purple line here. Over the entire duration of this animation, our text is slowly going to move up. We definitely want it a little bit faster than that. Maybe we'll go in about 1.5 seconds, and we'll push O with that sequence text selected. So now the animation will play out a little bit faster. And we could even shorten it down more than that. I feel like that's still a little bit too slow. Somewhere in there. So we now have our purple cow text animating up, but it's not very smooth, so we need to add in some extra parameters. If we go to the controls here on the left side, we can find stuff like the speed, which is currently set to constant. Let's go ahead and set that to ease both. So now if we play it out, the animation will be a little bit smoother. We can also select the spread. I happen to like how this looks at 4. So the spread is how much the animation is playing out over each text. So if we set this down to 1, it's going to only do 1 character at a time. If we set it to 4, you'll see how it's actually spreading over into the U. So the U is animating as the P is still animating, so on and so forth. So it really smooths out the animation nicely. But we want it to come from nothing, and that's where we need to animate the opacity. So going over to our parameter settings, we can click add, select format, and find opacity. We'll just click and drag that down to 0. So now each of our text items will be fading in just like the Colin and Samir animation. Now that we've got our purple cow text figured out, we're going to go ahead and push Command D to duplicate it. These words are just going to say BA. From there, we can go ahead and drag that straight on up in the middle there, and we can scale it down to a place where we're happy. I'm thinking somewhere around 110 is looking pretty nice. So now both of these objects are gonna have that animation, but I want the BA animation to be a little bit faster. So selecting our text sequencer, we can move back in time a little bit and push O. So now the BA is going to pop up a little bit faster than the purple cow. So now we need to add in the numbers that are at the bottom of the screen. So to do that, let's go ahead and create a simple circle. Now I'm going to copy their reference exactly to get it looking as close as we can. So I'm going to click this checkbox to enable it, and we can see our circles here. Then I'm just going to click and drag to fill out my circle. Then with our outline, we're going to disable that. And with our color, we can go ahead and drop that down to a gray tone. You'll notice that this one is yellow here, which we will fix a little bit later, but it's going to be a lot easier if we start with a base of a gray for all of these numbers. Now that we've done that, we can go ahead and disable our reference. Now within this circle has a number. So let's go ahead and go to our text tools. We'll click in the middle of that circle and just type 1. And it's currently set to white, so let's go into our text settings and set that to black. Then from there, we'll go to our format settings. We'll make sure it's aligned in the center. We'll select our arrow tool, and we can actually zoom way in here. I'll push space and click and drag around to navigate around our box. And if we push command, we can slide it around without the guides snapping our text. Okay, so we've got our first number here. I'm gonna select the first number and the circle. We're gonna right click and group it. Let's rename this group to be number 1. We first wanna create our animation for this first number so that the later animations come a little bit faster. So with our number 1 selected, we'll go into our properties and we'll find our position settings right here. Let's go ahead and readjust our X value to be -150, and we'll set our Y value to -300. I find that working with nice even numbers makes it a lot easier in the animation process. So now that we have these values set, go ahead and click on this down arrow. We only want our animation to be applied to the Y value, so we'll see this keyframe here. Let's go ahead and move in a few frames, maybe around 18 or so. And then on the Y parameter, we're gonna click to add a keyframe. Then from there, we'll move to the beginning of our animation and click and drag to drop our number here. Now we're gonna want some extra space for a little bit later when we animate the camera slightly zooming in. So I'm gonna go ahead and set this down to something like -800. So if we currently play it, you'll see how this animation is playing out. It is nice and smooth, but I definitely wanted to have that real dynamic feel of starting off really fast and then sloping off. I believe that's a logarithmic curve, but honestly, I didn't do very well in math. With our animation keyframe selector here, which you can again get with Command 8, we can select this keyframe and find this Bezier curve. If you don't have that, right click, interpolation over to Bezier. Click and drag that curve so that it slopes off really nicely. So let's go ahead and see how this animation looks. Perfect, I'm really liking how that looks. So now that we have our first number set up, let's go ahead and add in the other numbers. So I'll push Command D to duplicate it. We'll set this to say number 2. We'll go inside and find our number value, which we can change over to say 2. Selecting our number 2, we'll go to our properties and find the X value. In here, we're just gonna type 0, so now it should be directly in the center of our frame. Now, I want this number 2 to start a little bit later, so let's go ahead and find about where I want it to start, maybe somewhere in there. We're gonna push Shift and left bracket. That is going to shift this group over to the right side, but it's not going to trim off anything like setting an in and out point might do. So now if we push play, the animations will be a little bit offset. Now that might be offset a little bit too much, so let's go ahead and jump back a few frames. Shift left bracket, looks like frame 4, and we'll push play, and now that's looking really, really nice. After that, we can select number 2, push Command D. We'll go ahead and set the number to say number 3. In the text, we can set that to say 3. Selecting the number 3 group, we'll go to our properties and we'll set the X value to be +150. Number 1 is -150 and the other side is +150, so we know that everything is really nicely spaced apart by 150 pixels. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and offset number 3, so we'll go in about 8 frames, and then with number 3 selected, we'll push Shift and left bracket, and now if we push play, we should have a really nicely offset animation. So we can go ahead and collapse number 3 and number 2. We'll find number 1, and we want to set the first circle to be yellow. So selecting the circle, we'll go to the shape settings, we'll find our color, and we can use the color picker here and pick that yellow. Now the final touch to the animation is that nice little dark line going through 1, 2, and 3. So let's go ahead and create that. In our graphics group, we'll select our pen tool and we'll click to create a point. We'll hold Shift and click to create another point in the middle of 3. Then we'll push Enter. This is looking exactly as I want it with this bright red ugly color. So let's go ahead and set that to a black color just like so. We can drag the width way down. With that Bezier curve selected, we'll push Command left bracket 1, 2, 3 times to drop it in the layer group under number 1, 2, and 3. So now it should be behind everything. If I push Command and slash, you'll see that those points go away so we can actually see what is happening here on the screen, looking really nice. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and animate the line drawing on. So we'll find that right as the 1 is landing, we can come down to the last point offset, set that to 0, click to add a keyframe, then we'll slide forward a few frames here just as the 3 is finishing and drag that up to a full 100. We can push play and see that animation writing on. Maybe we want it a little bit slower. We'll just click and drag this keyframe over to the right side to slow it down a bit. just like so. One thing you'll notice with the Colin and Samir graphic though is that there is a nice little zoom happening at the beginning. So to do that, we'll go on up to Add Object and select Camera. From there, it's going to ask if we want to switch it to 3D. We will go ahead and do so. But something you'll want to make sure that you check is that your background is still a 2D layer. To do that, you can actually see by this little icon right here if it's 2D, or it'll look like this layer stack if it is a 3D layer. So to achieve this zooming in, we'll move forward till the end of the animation, somewhere right in here at frame 20. Then with our camera selected, we'll go into the position settings under Properties, find the Z parameter, and click to add a keyframe. Then we'll move back to the beginning of the animation and set this to something like 150. So if I push play, we should have a zoom in. But we definitely want this zoom to be a little bit smoother. So we'll come down to our keyframe editor so we can select this curve, and we'll just adjust the curve so that it starts off really fast and then slows down. Perfect. And I might even stretch out that animation just a little bit. Nice. Then one other thing I noticed is that the camera was slightly out of focus at the beginning. So we'll select our graphics layer, go up to filters, go to blur, and I'm going to select Gaussian blur. We could use the defocus blur, which would be a more accurate representation, but the Gaussian blur is much faster on the computer. We can go ahead and set our amount up to something like 40. Then from there, we can click to add a keyframe. We'll move forward to the end of the animation and set that down to 0. So if we play through, it should start off a little bit blurry and then come into focus. Okay, so we have this whole template built out, but what if we wanted to adjust some of these parameters in Final Cut Pro? For example, maybe we wanted to change point 2 to be yellow instead of point 1. So with number 1 selected, we'll find this circle and find the fill color. We're going to click on this down arrow, and this time we're going to select Add to Rig, Create New Rig, and we're going to select New Pop-Up. Now that we've done that, we'll go also into number 2 and do the same thing. Click this down arrow, add to rig, rig, pop up, and finally the exact same thing for number 3. Add to rig, rig, add to pop up. Let's go ahead, double click on pop up and rename it to say number selector. Now that we've done that, we can see in here that we have this yellow color and the 2 gray colors. What we need to do is rename snapshot 1, number 1. Then when we want to go to number 2, we can click on this selector and go to snapshot 2. Now in circle fill color 1, let's change that to be that gray color that we've previously selected. Then in number 2, we can go ahead and set that to yellow. Now if we rename this, type in number 2, we now have a pop-up so we can change it over to number 1. Now number 1 is selected, number 2 is selected, and finally we'll go to number 3. We will reset number 1's color over to the gray color. Then on number 3, we can select that yellow color. Again, we'll rename this number 3. Just like so. So now we can go back to number 1, and if we click on this down arrow and select publish, when we save this project, you'll be able to actually select that in Final Cut Pro. So from here, let's go ahead and push Command S, and we'll just call this the Colin and Samir title card, and we can throw it in whatever category you like. I'm going to throw it into my tutorials category and push publish. So now that we're in Final Cut Pro, we can go into our titles. We'll locate the category we put this into under tutorials, and in here you'll see the Colin and Samir title. It should have the animation play out really nicely. Then we can go into our titles and select the number selector. So if we want it to be number 2, now number 2 is selected just like so. But there is a considerable problem. If we want this title to be much shorter, I'll go ahead and click and drag this to be way shorter. You'll see as I play it, the animation is way faster. And if we drag this out to be way longer, the animation is going to be much, much slower. There's a very easy fix for this. Let's go into Apple Motion. At the end of our animation, right there, we can push Shift M to create a marker. Double click that marker and change the type from type standard over to build in optional. Now we'll push OK, we'll push Command S. Now we can just double click on that title to replace it. And if I click and drag this way longer, you'll see how the animation's exactly the same, just as we originally designed it. And if we shorten it, it's the exact same animation. Now, if you don't want to spend all of this time creating your own custom templates in Apple Motion, I highly recommend that you check out today's sponsor, Envato Elements. If we go up to video templates, we can select Final Cut Pro. And in here, you are going to see thousands of different templates you can use for Final Cut Pro. And if we look over here on the left side, you can actually see there are 3,268 different templates that you can download for Final Cut. And the best part about Envato Elements is that you get an unlimited amount of downloads. So if you want to download hundreds of different templates for your videos in Final Cut to really change the variety, you can do that. It's totally up to you how many you want to download. But not only do you have access to all of these absolutely insane templates with transitions and graphics and pretty much anything you can think of, but you also have access to their massive stock video library with over 3 million different pieces of footage in their stock video library. They have their music library that has over 124,000 different songs. They have their sound effects library. They have different graphics templates they can use for Photoshop or Affinity Photo. So really, it is such a massive platform and one of the best deals you are ever going to get for a stock service. You can get their annual plan for just $16.50 a month, which is a mind-blowing price. It will absolutely level up your editing game. So make sure you use the links down below. It really does help out my channel. Also, the people over at Envato Elements were nice enough to give me a full year to give away to one of you. I mentioned it in a video a couple weeks ago, and so now I'm going to choose the winner. Here I am on commentpicker.com. I'm going to push start to start the raffle, and the winner is Producer Hat. Congratulations, you have won the Envato Elements subscription. I'm going to try and reach out to you and find the best way to send this your way. Thank you so much for participating in this comment, all of you, and thank you so much for everybody who watches this channel, which enables me to be able to give away stuff like this to you. With that being said, consider pressing that like button, consider subscribing, also consider being a patron if you want to download this project file from today's video. With that being said, I cannot wait to see you in the next one.